We can't control outcomes. We can help influence outcomes. And part of that is us telling you our honest opinion on it. Now, ultimately, it's going to be the CEO and the board and those people who make a decision, and we will, as part of your team, be part of that. But we will still give you that objective, honest advice.
Welcome to the Love Your Brand podcast. If you're looking for real conversations with real people, you're the right place. Let's go!
Hey guys, welcome to the Love Your Brand show. We have a blast. We laugh. Come join the ride. Today we were blessed to have Mr. Joshua Altman, communications leader with more than 20 years of experience spanning both the public and private sectors. He's the managing director of beltway.media, a DC-based communications firm that provides fractional communications leadership. Prior to that, he was a multimedia journalist at The Hill, where he covered federal policy and multiple election cycles. As a consultant, Joshua helps organizations from federal agencies to startups refine their messaging and connect with audience, customers, and investors. He's led major rebranding and digital modernization projects for government agencies. Dude does it all. He's a master communications officer. Can't wait for you to learn more about it. Enjoy the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. So I started as a multimedia journalist. I was with the Hill newspaper in D.C., Washington, D.C., where I still am, covering Congress. I left that and started doing what we do now, which is corporate communications and fractional communications leadership. And we work with businesses, of all sizes. We specialize with small, medium businesses, startups, and scale-ups, giving them the communications leadership that they need at their stage of growth.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, Joshua, you're not related to Sam, right?
No, okay. Not. At least not that I know of.
Not that he knows. Okay, so we can't put that on the cover. All right, talk to us. CCO. A lot of people are like, "What the heck is a CCO?"
What we do is a little different from, a marketing officer or your chief brand officer. We focus on two big things, shaping perception, building and maintaining trust long term. And that means taking integrated, big picture views of how messaging impacts reputation, growth, stakeholder confidence across your platforms, across your media, internal and external. So while you have, your brand officer really focusing on that brand identity, you have a marketing officer, focused on your marketing. We are looking at all of these things together. And a lot of companies, especially, smaller growing companies, might have some of these functions. They're not necessarily working together. But we bring all of that into, one department, one leadership role, and then work with, other internal staff, agencies, if you have agencies, and, help you with your growth.
That's awesome, Joshua. When we had the pre-call, you said, so I know you have a tech-heavy background.
I do.
And you actually accidentally kind of fell into this. You accidentally transitioned into becoming a chief communications officer. So give us a little background on how that accidentally happened and, the tech background you had before.
Yeah. So like I said, I was a multimedia journalist with the Hill newspaper. I was, shooting, editing, video like we're doing now, except with much more equipment than we need now. And what we did for that, to do that, you needed things, backgrounds in, webcasting, in networks, in hardware, in software, in web design and development. So when I left, being a full-time reporter, what I thought I would do was be a freelance reporter for maybe a year or two, and then go back to a news organization. I went to journalism school. I did my master's in something called communication, culture, and technology. My thesis was on news writing, engagement, and production. So I thought this would be what I would go back to.
Oh, wow.
It's been more than a few years now, and I haven't. I still do this. And because, people were looking for, they had someone who could really blend the content with the doing and those tech skills. They had, again, smaller companies, limited budgets, wanted a website refresh, wanted e-com, integrated, wanted their mail, to be more effective. And they needed someone who could do both the content and the actual hands-on work, which is why we still do take that, hands-on, very technical, combined with content, process to develop consistent storytelling, across your brand's, channels. So it really was people just looking for a project here to do this thing or a project there to do that thing. And there was a need for it.
That's good. I never, until we chatted with you, I'd never heard the term a chief communications officer. You mentioned we all know like a CMO or a CBO, your chief marketing or chief branding, but what makes your approach to communication different from like traditional marketing or branding roles?
So we're not just looking at, your public, your advertising, your paid ads or your marketing campaigns or, experiential events or, what is your brand's reputation? We are looking at those things. They are incredibly important to your company and what you're doing. But we are focused primarily on how you shape perception and build and maintain trust through those things. And it's with your customers, current customers, future customers, with your employees, with, if you are, a company that's, out there trying to raise venture funds, private equity funds, or, even, your earlier stage and you're looking at angel investment, your investor communications. And we are looking at how these things really do interact with each other. So what, can happen now, unfortunately, is it is very easy for internal communications to leak and become public. We see it very often where, a company's, private documents that could even be years or decades old somehow now become public because all you need is to take a picture of the screen or the paper and send it off to, X, Twitter, Blue Sky, wherever you're sending it. We understand that anything can become public information and will affect how you build and maintain that trust. So we're always looking at that with every piece of content and understanding that everything, even if it's not intended to, can become public and work with that as, kind of a core idea of how that will affect your brand.
So Josh, I mean, at least from my experience, that role usually gets transitioned to someone in, VP of marketing, head of marketing, to different players within the organization without the title of chief communications officer. Right. So
yeah,
they already struggle with, I guess, diversifying to the point to where they need to run a holistic visibility campaign. Like you do have to nowadays. You've got to be on pretty much every outlet, right? To get SERPs in AI, to get SERPs in Google, to get SERPs in video. You got to kind of do it all. So, I mean, I guess when you go to an organization, how much pushback have you had when they're like, oh, yeah, Susan does it. Oh, yeah, Jay does it. Jonathan does it.
So less than you would think, in part because we're brought in to companies that realize that, Susan does it or, Jonathan does it, but they might not be the person who should be doing it. A lot of these companies are, smaller, growing companies. They might not have a VP of marketing yet. They might not have a CMO. They might just be a company that, has external agencies, or they even have, just, a social media person or, a content creator type role, but no one in leadership who's working on those things. So they kind of recognize when bringing us in, we need to take a different approach. And the person doing it usually is, a founder or an early hire, their ops person, someone who doesn't have the communications background and usually doesn't want to be doing this because it's not their job. They're, the founding engineer, but they could build the company's website. So this kind of fell on them, but they don't want to be doing it. But now they're overseeing the social media marketer because, well, they were the person who built and manages the website, which isn't great for anyone. So not a ton of pushback.
And you hear that so often in these organizations. Somebody gets hired for a certain task or responsibility, and then as things evolved, or if somebody leaves, things just get kind of thrown on whoever in that role seems like the most likely candidate to take them on, even though they might not fall in their wheelhouse or their skill sets. Joshua, how would you help small businesses really integrate their communication functions that are often like so isolated?
Yeah, so usually you kind of have two models that sometimes work together. I mentioned these. We have all of this in-house with, relatively low-level employees who aren't necessarily part of the leadership team. And then they're supervised by the founder CEO or founder chief engineer, whoever is stuck with doing this that they don't want to. Or it's that person managing a bunch of agencies that are doing this. So we kind of figure out which they're using and what's best for them. And we will keep working with their agencies because sometimes you are in contracts and you have your agencies and they could be doing a great job. But your founding engineer does not want to be spending 5 hours a week doing, communications agency management. And there's no one who wants it and there's no one who's well suited for it, but it's only taking, 5 or so hours a week. It's not something they need a full-time hire for. So that's why we're fractional, is we come in and we're providing them the 5 hours a week, maybe 10 hours a week that they need to do that function. And then once we have it, we're able to say, here's how we can structure things and where you need, more integration to make sure that, your TikTok messaging matches what's in your, pitch deck. Because if someone gets your pitch deck and they like it, they're going to Google you. They're going to see what else is out there. And if A and B don't match, that's going to be something that causes questions.
Right. So how would a company typically realize that they might need a communications expert?
Two big ways. The first one is something goes terribly wrong and they need someone right now. We prefer not to have that because we like to get in before something goes wrong to help prevent it. The other is someone tells them, it could just be, a friend who, sees, why are you still managing the website? You're trying to develop whatever your technology is. Why is this still on you? It could be, one of their early investors saying, we need your focus on running the business, not managing social media agencies. So that, nudge can come from a lot of places, and usually they get it, more than once. When an investor says it and says, you need to do this, that tends to carry a lot more weight to move it forward than if their friend mentions it, because the investor, has the board seats usually and can, push them. And usually it has, the influence to do it. But those are the two big ways. And we've come in for both.
Yeah. So it's kind of a proactive versus reactive approach. The first option, which you listed, was kind of the reactive. There's a problem. And so now we need to fix it. What could be are there any telling signs like that an organization could look at where they know they might be struggling with communication in their organization?
Yeah. So probably the first one I mentioned already was someone who shouldn't be doing this function is. So if you're a CEO and you have, already now 5 or so employees, if you're the founder, you're one of the lead, early hire engineers, and this is still on you, and you have more than, 2, 3, 4 employees, that's usually a good sign that you could put this on a dedicated person. And this is a natural, part of your company growing. At first, of course, you couldn't because you had no revenue. You couldn't do it. You had no investment. It had to be the person who was, basically shouldering it all. As you grow, you have the opportunity to put this on, a dedicated person. So that's probably the big one. The other is, have increased requests for, and demands on your media. So, your social media channels are taking off, your sales are going well, you're getting requests, to appear on podcasts. You don't have time to, vet all those podcast requests. You're building your product. You're meeting with, your investors. You're talking with engineers and dev teams. vetting podcasts is not something you're able to do, for, 1 to 2 hours a day. So you need someone to do that. And of course, you don't need, a chief communications officer to do that. You can have, a lower level, communications person, looking at each podcast. But now, are those fitting with your product roadmap? Are those fitting with your bigger strategy? You need someone who's part of those conversations. So that's where we come in, is making sure that, your product roadmap matches, the media you're doing, both that you own and that you earn.
Got it. When we had the pre-call, we talked a bit about trust and building trust. It's kind of one of the main communication strategies that you were talking about. So how would you, if an organization was to engage with you, how would you help them really shape that perception and build trust?
Depends on the company. If they are, coming in reactive, you got to pretty much rebuild it if something happened. And, that's, transparency and honesty is usually the best approach in that, because like I said, your internal documents can become public. Anything, if you're not transparent when something happens, it'll come back to you. So general transparency and honesty. If you're coming in proactively, is your advertising truthful? Do people feel when they go to, your website, talk to your sales team, that they're, actually getting what they want? That, the website doesn't say one offer, free trial, as well, free trial, but we put a hold on your credit card. And actually, if you don't cancel it, we'll actually charge it. Well, people are going to question that a little bit. So it's really little things like that people notice. And we've all been those customers like, wait a minute, this free trial didn't say it required a credit card, or that they were going to require a Zoom demo and try and upsell me. I just wanted to try the one product, for, my 2-week, 30-day trial, whatever the offer is. We've been there. So the leadership of these companies, they kind of understand that, because they've also been those customers. Most of what I do is B2B, but I always tell people, yes, it's to a business, but that business is staffed by, and, the decisions are made by people, by consumers who do this themselves.
Yeah.
They know what, it is still a person at the end of that business.
We say that often, it's like, it's not really about B2B or B2C. It's H2H. It's human to human.
Yeah.
And I mean, people don't buy from brands, they buy from people. And so everything you just kind of outlined about really building the trust, it's the same thing with any relationship in life, whether it's our personal relationships or our business relationships, the same principles and rules apply.
Absolutely.
So Joshua, from what I hear, you primarily represent the client side. So they're working with agencies. They may have 3 agencies, a social media agency, an ad agency, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Dynamics. They may be pretty lean. So your thing is you come on behalf of the client, and you almost become somewhat of a communications liaison, but also it almost sounds more like almost a PM too.
Yeah. Oh, a lot of it is being a PM, because depending on if they, sometimes they're using agencies, sometimes it's in-house, and sometimes it's just, that one guy who really just wants to focus on building the product and not running their, X account anymore, because he's been doing it since day one. So there are a lot of kind of models that these companies use.
So I think it's kind of farce, a lot of these companies, when they engage, or especially with agencies, they assume that the agency will do everything. And I always say it takes 2 to tango. I don't care how much you know about an industry. Every company is slightly different. If they're not, they're a commodity. So it's our job to find a difference, which takes in-depth analysis, in-depth conversations, right? Even if they're the same companies doing the same thing, they've got to come up with differentiators and different value propositions, or they're just going to be fighting over price. So we all get those clients, and they don't understand that it takes 2 to tango. They've got to be the ones driving, right?
Yeah.
People hire companies and like, oh, I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to pay them a crap ton of money, and I'm going to sit back, but that is just false. No matter how much you spend, you've got to have that integration part. It's got to be someone from the organization and someone from this organization tying it in together, right?
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons that, ops person who kind of just got the role because everything that couldn't fall to someone else probably just fell under them is now managing these agencies. But they're not communications experts. They're operations experts. This is not what the person, should be spending, however many hours a week doing. But again, like I said, it's not where they need a 40-hour per week person. So they just kind of keep going with what they have. And that's where we kind of can fill that gap is we're that fractional, role, that person, that company that can just step in and take that off this person's plate. And because it's fractional, we are really integrated with your team. We're not just another agency. We are part of, your company, just at a fractional, basis. So, we're part of your leadership meetings, if that's, appropriate. We know your product roadmap because, like I said, your product roadmap is going to influence your communications.
Well, I think that's very efficient. I think that could drive, we hit a lot of bottlenecks, right? Because of, potentially who we're working with. They don't have the time. They don't have sometimes the finances or the knowledge that it takes to really get to where they need to go. So they end up leaning a lot on agencies and social media agencies and companies. And then they're a little disappointed when things don't really align with their expectations because they didn't do the proper foundational work, the proper strategy, the proper blueprint to develop that proper roadmap, right? Everybody just jumped in. Hey, let the agency run with it. Well, once again, it takes two to tango. I don't care how many times whoever says it doesn't is absolutely wrong. No. I don't care how niche they are.
Off to an agency.
No. Like I said, there's too many nuances, right?
Well, and the agencies, we're always going to be at fault. It's always going to be
Absolutely.
our fault. It was never them. It's always us.
Always going to be put on, the agent, and it's easy to do that, and we understand, we can also fill some of those other, staff roles if, you need, you don't want to be an agency. You want to keep as much of it in-house as possible. We can help you with that also,
But this is what Joshua, this is what I like about what you do with the communication, because I was talking with a buddy this morning just about marriages. And, a lot of times fights and disagreements and tensions in marriage are over silly, silly things. And typically they're rooted in communication. There was some kind of miscommunication that spiraled into something else. It's never about this topic. It's always about this topic. And it's, again, going back to personal relationships and business relationships are completely parallel. They're not separate in how we communicate. And I think in the pre-call, Joshua, when we chatted with you, we were talking about like product management teams and how they're so siloed. They're working on the product and the services. And there's no communication with like the launch team or the marketing team or the sales team. And so they create this product, then they pass it off when there was none of this talking. In the meantime, to understand who's this going to, who is the market, what is the value proposition? And, I think a lot of times, like with that product roadmap that you mentioned earlier, a lot of times it's misaligned with the website content. So like how important to you is aligning like the website content with a company's product roadmap?
Oh, it's very important. And I always, your website content, let's talk, blog posts, articles, thought leadership, stuff like that, should always be working with your product roadmap. Now, your design could be a little different. You might launch a new product, and of course, you then take a dev site and that goes live because you're, doing your product launch, you make a change. If you want to see how communications works with, product roadmap, Apple is and has for a long time been a great example of it. Going back to their debut of the iPhone, they prepped that and their stores and everything for years, Steve Jobs to debut iPhones to people. And everything was really aligned to, we are debuting iPhones for years before it went live. Because of course, the iPhone was not something that was launched in 6 months. This was a very long period of development for them. So you saw that. And of course, no one knew, why are stores laid out like this? Why are products like this? Well, we had the iPods that, well, sort of looked like a early iPhone. This was very much intentional for them.
Yes.
And their customers were used to it. So Apple was always a great example of aligning, products with their communications. And like I said, has been for a long time. A lot of companies less so, in part because very, very few companies have Apple's resources. That's just, they're giant. We do not all have Apple resources to do it, but you don't need Apple resources to do it. You just need, a weekly or twice weekly, depending on what where you are, check-ins. Here's what we're developing. Here's where we are. Here's what we're hearing, on our social media channels. Here's what we're hearing from other sources. This is what we're writing on our thought leadership. So if you're launching an iPhone, you shouldn't be, having all your, corporate blog posts be about record players, because it's all, well, they both play music, very differently.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And to piggyback what Jason was talking about earlier, like with what differentiates a brand, if we're all selling the same thing, how are we different than the other ones? That messaging, that is the foundational aspect of these organizations. Before you get into advertising and marketing, you have to understand what your brand stands for and make sure that that's clear. And a lot of times when I meet with a client or a prospect, I ask them these questions of what's important to them, what their brand stands for, how are they different? And then I can easily go to their website right when I have them, and we can look at that website together and be like, hey, Joshua, you just told me these 3 things. However, when I go to your website, those 3 things are not here. In fact, there are different things that are here. And so a lot of times, I don't know if it just gets somebody else previously, does the work or they did it incorrectly, or it changes because there's rebrands of sorts that happen. But then going into what you're sharing, somebody else comes into that position. Now it's their responsibility. They have no expertise in putting these things accurate, correcting the problems or the holes in the boat, and they just kind of leave it. And so that would be somewhere that you come in, you can identify those problems and, make the necessary edits to bring that up to speed. Correct?
Absolutely. And sometimes, it is, just an outdated website, and, we've rebranded. We have, a new direction now, new leadership came on. We were X. Now we're kind of focused on Y. I was working with one company a couple of years ago, and they said, we really want to do, some thought leadership, some blog posts, internal and external about our corporate values, how this, drives us to our product, I won't say who it was, but, if they were, in sustainability, why our values are in this, green tech sustainability space. And people around, the table on the Zoom call said, we have values. I understand, we have that, but we have written down, listed values. And, the CEO said, yes, we worked on these, 5 years ago. And some of these people were there, many were not. It's like, well, we didn't know about these. They're not on our website. They're not part of our training. We don't have them, written anywhere that we would see. So that was a huge disconnect, like you're talking about. People actually said, we have these values.
Wow.
We understand what's important to us, but they're written down somewhere. So that was a big, moment of, we need to kind of go back and, are these still the values? And they were pretty still spot on. Because, they were guiding the company. People didn't know about them. And they didn't realize that these were actually guiding principles to, why we do, green tech sustainability, why this is important to us and our customers, and who we're trying to sell to improve their products.
Yeah, there's such an importance on focusing on the internal aspect, the internal meaning inside the organization. Organizations, a lot of times they go externally. They go straight to the clients. They go straight to the market to try to sell, to try to promote, to try to, get their name out there. But it makes me think of Richard Branson, if you know who he is, started, Virgin Atlantic, all the things. I mean, serial entrepreneur. He focuses so much on his team before he goes outside. And so one thing that jumps out to me with him is like vacation time. And coming from a background in corporate, typically when you join an organization, you get 2 weeks a year of vacation. You serve that company for 5 or 10 years, you might get an extra week. And then another 20 years, you might get an extra week. Yeah. Richard Branson takes the approach of you take however much vacation time you need. And often people come against that and say, well, they're going to abuse that if we give them all that freedom. And the opposite happens. Instead of people abusing it, they actually take less than 2 weeks in their year because they actually love the organization that they work with. They love the things that the organization stands for. And just like you're talking about, where this company doesn't understand, didn't even know that they had values because it wasn't written anywhere. These employees of Richard Branson, they know what the company stands for. And because he does such a focus on making those things important. So now they become those brand ambassadors when they're going out talking to people. And so it's just such a paradigm shift of how he's honed in on that and working on the employees instead of going straight to the market first.
Yeah. And, we do focus a lot on those internal. That's one of your key stakeholders that we are really making sure is aligned, and not just, your emails about, here's how to set vacation days before, December, January, make sure there's covered, anything like that. It's making sure that they do know your values, and, it's on, their LinkedIn's, and it is part of when they're talking to customers or just, every day, that, it's something they understand. Because if they're in sales or they're in customer success, trust me, again, we know this because we're customers too, like we talked about. Those people hear our complaints. They hear our concerns all the time. They know, what's going on better than, your developers do, because they're hearing it firsthand from your users. So make sure that, they know what those values are. And they could even talk about, to an extent that you want it public, your roadmap and what's coming down and how to, yes, we know there's this bug. We're fixing it. It's going to, it is important to things like that make a huge difference about building trust around your brand.
And Josh, I think something very important with your story that I find so intriguing is the fact that you covered multiple election cycles.
Yeah.
Right? Federal policy. And let's say we all know that game, right? You're talking about saying the wrong thing. They'll dig up something from your yearbook. Hey, you wrote this in your yearbook, right? And it kind of reminds me, I think that experience, do you think being in that entrenchment of where everything that's said is, you've got to be careful, the wrong tweet, the wrong thing they write down. Do you think you saw that in real time and that kind of molded you to then see it in business in general? Because let's face it, politics is government, but it's also business, right? I mean, multiple elections. So you were there, you were in the trenches, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, do you think that helped craft this position for you?
It did. It absolutely did. And, like you say, they'll dig up a yearbook from, high school, and now you're in your 60s. And, who knows what you wrote back then?
Yeah.
None of us want.
I want so much.
Fortunately, it was before internet for us.
Hey,
yeah.
I want so much crap out there that they'll look and they'll just be like, oh, it's just too much crap. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you say it was before internet for us, but I was reading, so this is now going back a few years, that eventually, for, younger millennials and, Gen Z, people who really had, Facebook by middle school, that there will be so much. It's basically, and this was an article maybe now 5, even 10 years ago, that everyone's either going to have to sink or swim together, that everything will have to just be, brushed aside from, all those old internet, posts, because everyone will have something. So when everyone has it, it just will become less of a big deal, because you could pull up, that old high school post for any candidate, because they'll all have been, had Facebook in middle school. So,
yeah,
which was very interesting. When everyone has it, it just will be less of a thing, because how interesting will it be?
Yeah. I remember when, it's probably a decade ago. I remember when social media really was used as a screening process for interviewing. with a company. They could quickly go to that person's profile, see what they post or how they show up. And it's a true reflection of how they would show up in the organization, which honestly, I think that's very smart. If I was hiring somebody for my organization, that's probably the first thing I would do. I would go there and check them out. And it's not as much about having different beliefs or views, like politically or things like that, but is this person going to represent our brand or go back to what we're talking about? Are they a reflection of the core values of what we stand for? And so that's just good practice of hiring to make sure you bring team members that are aligned with that. But Joshua, question I wanted to ask you when we had the pre-chat, we talked a little bit about advertising and marketing and different approaches today and how that's changed, and so much like Google ads and pay-per-click, performance marketing isn't really working, in the same way that it used to. But you had mentioned something, a quote, you said, everything should be useful in marketing.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on your philosophy there?
Yeah, because, again, we are inundated with, ads all day, on every device. You see them now, even cars are, displaying ads when they detect that you're stopped in some cases, which that's a whole different, conversation.
Creepy.
But that's not really useful. I mean, I guess if it tells you, McDonald's is nearby, I guess if you want McDonald's, that can be useful. But, for what we're talking about is if you put out an ad, it shouldn't just be buy our stuff. It should be, and we have, these on our website. We have, some, short self-assessments, one for startups, one for cybersecurity communications. We're launching relatively soon, some quick guides for, startup communications. And if I were to, make these into, say, a LinkedIn ad, one ad type that according to LinkedIn does very well are the slideshows, the document slideshows, which I'm sure you have both seen because they're everywhere on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn tells ad buyers that these do well. Those, because it's useful, because it has information. It's not, 8 slides of buy this product because it will save you money. Well, what does it do? How does it help me? Each one of those pages is delivering some value besides buy it, it saves you money. Buy it, it increases efficiency. It has, even if you don't buy, it has some useful thing, some value. So one, if you look at our quick guides, when they're up, which will be very soon, is it will, have, 3 things that you need to do for, brand communications on one page. And that's, very short. They're quick guides for a reason. It's there. It's helpful. They're just bullet points. Are we doing X, Y, and Z? Yes or no? Here, now we can do them. We can, have this new information that we can, take and improve what we're doing. But everything should be useful.
You said something about, when we previously chatted about performance marketing, Jay Hill, that you hit on, and saying a lot of people, from all the saturation from all these companies with all these big promises, right? That there's kind of an unrealistic perception around marketing in general, right? Like when it comes to actually measuring their ROI, like they're throwing brand equity out of the equation. They're throwing, long-term sales out of the equation. The long game, which Joshua, that's what you focus on, is communications. That's a slow play, nurturing communications process, right?
Yeah.
So,
and it's one of the reasons our, contracts are, for most of them, a minimum of 1 year, usually a minimum of 2. And that's because we know this is a process. And I call it, the 6-month itch, because around the 6-month mark, people start getting a little antsy. Everyone. This is pretty universal. We've put in a lot of money. Where are the results? I'm like, well, we can't measure the things that haven't happened. You haven't had a major crisis. You haven't had any document leaks. You haven't had, your Twitter or X taken over and, starting, to put out things that you don't want. You have a consistent brand voice that's preventing that. Okay. So now we know what hasn't happened, which may or may not have happened anyway. That could have been either way. But in terms of what has happened, let's look at 6 months from now. Let's look at, a year from now when you have that growth. Because right now you're trying to, get ready for your next, letter round. Okay. this will position you better for that when, investors, basically their first thing they're going to do is they're running a Google search. It's the first thing any of us do in most situations is we run a Google search, or maybe now a ChatGPT or Claude search. But we're basically just typing the company into the internet and seeing what comes up. This is now helping you with that. So you get that, kind of nervous point at, 6 months, which is why we look at the minimum 1 year. And even sometimes if we look at a project, like we have to do 2 because of we know what your horizon is.
So that's a good point, Joshua. I want to talk ROI with you about the services you provide, because what you're talking about kind of reminds me of branding. If somebody comes to our agency to talk about marketing, that's advertising is really black and white. You spend X dollars and you make X dollars for the most part, or you spend and you lose. So it's easy to show somebody that. If I said, hey, do you have $1 million ad budget? And they say no. I say, if I can guarantee a $2 million return, would you have $1 million ad budget? They're like, absolutely. So that's marketing. Branding is harder to quantify the ROI there, because it doesn't move the needle as much. We marketers understand the importance of that and how it plays into, brand perception and how it plays into marketing and sales, how they go hand in hand. And then what you're talking about having a 12-month and sometimes 24-month agreement, with these organizations, because it takes time to gain that traction. It's like SEO. I remember when SEO first came out and, people are investing in it in 6 months. They're like, hey, we still haven't seen anything. And you have these agencies, a lot of them kind of gave SEO a bad name. You're spending a buttload of money on SEO, but it takes so long to see it. So then people are so hesitant of investing in SEO because they're like, no, I've worked with a previous agency and, it took 6 or 8 months and they spent $30,000 and I never saw anything, kind of a thing. So for you, kind of fitting what I'm hearing you say, kind of fitting in that boat of, it's not black and white. It's kind of gray area there. When you go to an organization and they choose to engage with you, how are you setting those expectations of what ROI looks like with the services you provide?
2 big ways. The first one is I tell them I will not guarantee you a particular outcome because I can't. We all know that. Most companies will tell you, oh, we'll get you clicks, we'll get you sales. I'll tell you from the very beginning, I cannot guarantee you a particular outcome. There are too many other factors involved. If this is about getting a letter round, we could help you. We can give you good public perception. But if investors choose to give you money or not, is something completely different. If, you get sales or not, that's a lot of it's on your salespeople. If you get clicks or not, we all know right now, between AI and Google and other sources, that's kind of in flux right now, how those things happen. So we can show you, we can influence things, but ultimately we cannot control human behavior. Trust me, I wish I could. It would make things a lot easier, but I can't. And
that's really good because that's kind of overcoming an objection up front before they even ask it. You're just kind of putting it out there. And I often say it's like, if you can eliminate the objections that somebody has before they ask it, they're going to have no reason not to move forward with you.
Yeah. And that goes, the second thing I tell them is, and they'll have figured out from the first thing is, I am going to be straight up and honest with you. I am not, which they usually figure out from the first thing I've told them is, I'm not going to, tell you, if you will have an idea, if that's not going to be the best way forward, I'll tell you, we'll tell you this stuff. We're not just here to say yes to you. And there are companies that want an agency that's going to say yes to them 100% of the time, that won't, conflict with them, that won't present alternative views. If that's what they want, that's not us. Because, like I said, we can't control outcomes. We can help influence outcomes. And part of that is us telling you our honest opinion on things. Now, ultimately, it's going to be the CEO and the board and those people who make a decision, and we will, as part of your team, be part of that. But we will still give you that objective, honest advice.
I like that. I like that a lot. It's sad that honesty in 2025, honesty is kind of a key differentiator.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's true.
So cycles.
As we kind of talking about marketing and advertising, different approaches again, because in the pre-call we chatted about performance marketing versus some of this stuff. Like if somebody asked you for your recommendations on advertising channels today, what would you guide them to as the most effective or useful ways to advertise?
Depending on the company. So we're typically dealing with, unfortunately, yes, human to human, but as most people put it, B2B. LinkedIn is still very good, especially if you are providing something that's useful. I have found in a lot of cases, LinkedIn groups can be very efficient for your marketing. If you are posting, instead of just posting to your page, where it's really going to connections and their connections, if they comment or like or interact, posting to groups can get you a different reach, people who might not necessarily already be connections or, second degree connections. So that can be very good. And coming from a person, and I do these experiments with our own pages, personal and corporate pages, get a lot more when it comes from a person as opposed to a corporate page. So a person posting to a group, this isn't a paid ad. This is just your content. Really can be a good channel. The LinkedIn paid ads can also be a good way. Boosting posts, if you make those sort of quick guides posts that we do, if we do it for clients, those slideshows that are valuable. AI search is becoming a lot more prevalent.
Right.
One stat I saw, and I have not tested this myself, it's still, of course, all very new and everyone's kind of playing with it, is that a lot of what AI is sourcing originates with corporate communications. So stuff on, pages that have a good reputation. If your website has a good reputation, Google search reputation, your corporate blog post can be something that AI, will reflect. Google search still, a lot of people, it is still where people go. That, ranking there is very important. So, yes, that's SEO, but also, do you have good content? A lot of it. And is it hitting what you need to? And again, that's going back to them. Does your content match your product roadmap, match your corporate values, match what people are searching for? So if you are a green tech company, are you people who are searching, green tech sustainability getting you? Or are they getting someone else? Are people getting you if they're searching, other keywords that aren't necessarily focused on your values and what would bring people in? So it really will depend on the company, but those are the biggest groups. I do think that AI, though, those AI searches, because they're, as far as I know, we haven't been able to pay to, rank higher in them yet. So that is still mostly, organic.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah. Oh, it will be soon, I'm sure.
There's an invisible bar, Joshua, that it's really hard to dial in on. Say if you're working with client A as communications, right? And they're like, hey, our competitors are B, C, and D. And you do your research, Joshua, and you're just like, wow, these guys are just kicking butt and taking names, right? They're on like high plans of SEO. They're blogging, they're doing videos, they're spending bukus in PPC. And then you got company A that says they're a competitor, but they've only got maybe a quarter of the budget total, right? So realistically, you got to then tell them, well, where do you put this money, right? Because in order to truly take market share and take that next level of growth, there's this invisible line that you got to hit. That it's unfortunate, like, because if you're at such a low impression rate, if you're doing such an infrequent amount of communications out there via digitally on platforms or whatnot, then it truly is hard to compete and grow. And sometimes, to be honest with you, breaking even at that point is better than declining, right? So that's kind of something we've been playing with AI, with the AI summaries and whatnot. We're seeing more of this holistic approach and really trying to drill in on exactly who the competitors are realistically, what it takes to get there and start taking away market share from them. And if they've got deeper pockets, you've got to be truly creative nowadays, right?
Yeah.
With your writing, especially
Yeah.
in your communications.
So I would look at it as, they say, companies B, C, and D are their competitors. Are those who their competitors are now, or who they want their competitors to be 5 years from now? Because if you're, I'll go back to green tech, if you're in that, green tech space, yes, you might make, some sort of wind power solution. Your competitor is not General Electric making windmills, doing their wind power. It is not their solar power solution. They are not your competitor today. They might be who you want to compete with in 5 or 10 years. They are not today's competitor. So you need to find a way to compete with who your actual, today competitors are. Don't ignore what, GE is doing, because it's important and they're going to set trends that people are looking for. But also be realistic about someone is not going to, search for you and end up, with GE. They're searching for a small company. They're looking for the new tech. They're looking for something different. So who else is doing that? And make that the focus of competing with today, with the eye on 5-10 years from now, competing with GE.
I like that reality check, Joshua. And I think they're far in between nowadays. I mean, you see, let's just throw in marketing as a bucket, right? You got communications, marketing, fractional, brand. I mean, you name it, SEO. It's all been thrown into one bucket, let's face it. And you've got everybody and their grandmother sending out emails and messages saying they can do it for the cheapest and get you on, rank the fastest. So it's unfortunate that real talk and reason that we're competing with that, right? Realistically, because they're getting so bombarded, they still think that it's not reasonable. And we've came across that several times, and it's unfortunate. It's a long play, right? And if you're lucky, you get some nice short wins along the way, right?
Oh yeah. Like I said, that's why we start at 1 year, with some companies even 2. It's because it is looking at a longer picture than can we get, to the top of YouTube today. Because just because you're there today doesn't mean anyone will remember your video tomorrow. Someone else will take that top spot. So that is why we're looking at, those 2 big things, shaping perception, build and maintain trust long term. Because you do need to think in, yes, I got a lot of hits today. Not every video is going to get that spot. So how can we use that over a period of time?
So I think we're all in agreement. What we're saying here is the long-term approach really is crucial in communication and marketing. And we live in such a day and age of instant gratification. I want it right now. And like I was saying earlier with some of these marketing paid ads, if I spend this, I expect this back. And so, the long-term approach is crucial. Joshua, you help some companies, eventually transition to an in-house communications team where they're no longer reliable on you, right? So how would you do that? How would you help the companies with that?
So if you've been with us, for a while, you might even tell us, at the beginning, we are looking for, growth to, within 5 years to 200 employees. We want to bring this in-house. You're kind of that bridge for us. Like, that's what we're here for, if that's what you want. So we will, this is where you want to go, help you find and then onboard and transition to that in-house person, while also building up your team in-house. So you might be relying on agencies now. You might be relying on us to do a lot of that hands-on work, which is great. But if you want all of that in-house, we'll help you do that. So you're less reliant on, that external function.
Got it. I think I just have one more. I want to end as we finish our time today. I want to end on something everybody knows about. And, as we're filming today, number of weeks back, month back, you had the whole thing with Coldplay concert and astronomer. And you have this organization that most of the world has never heard of, knows nothing about. And in an instant on social media, now the whole world knows about them. And so, with the PR approaches, around handling unique communication challenges, astronomer had to kind of do that. So how would, taking what happened there, is kind of setting the context for what can happen with the organization. How would you help these companies prepare for potential public scrutiny or information leaks, things, of that nature that could happen?
Yeah, we do crisis communications planning. I don't know if we've ever planned for your CEO got caught having an affair at a Coldplay concert. That I don't think most companies have planned for that. But general personnel matters would be up there. And, we would have looked at things like who is, going to be responsible for communicating with the public. Sometimes it would be, your CEO. In this case, that wouldn't be who you would want. You'd have a backup person.
So, yeah,
You would
probably
have
wouldn't be the best play.
you would have designated a backup person through this planning, and that would be the go-to. Your backup person would be there in the event that, your CEO is on vacation and out of reach, or the center of the scandal that you are now dealing with. So those would be reasons for it. Then it would be, have those press releases pre-written as much as possible and approved as much as possible, where you're at that point, I call you're mad libbing a press release for those of us who remember Mad Libs. You're filling in the blanks.
Yeah.
You're filling in the blanks as best you can. Again, this was not a typical situation at the concert, so you might have to do a little more and get a little more approval, but that would be part of it. And then, of course, if something like a personnel matter, do you to go with, there were basically, and I'm part of, a lot of communications groups. I'm sure you guys are as well. The two big ways, people said they would have dealt with it is exactly like Astronomer did, or, just say, these are two private adults. They happen to be our employees. It will be handled, by them personally, and we have nothing further to say, rather than continuing with it. The downside of that is you can take this story and have your headlines, with your company name in it for a while if you, carry it on. So there are benefits if a company wants to, stay in the news and ride it out. They could do that. All press is good press is what, a saying. People may not remember, they might remember this one in a year or two, but most of the time they don't remember why they know the company name. They just know they read about it.
Right.
So just be in headlines, was one approach versus, okay, these are private, people. They were on their own time. They were not at a company function. That's it. We will make no further public comment. So two approaches. We do, drill in these situations. We practice, what would happen, how you get in touch with people, who would have to sign off again when these changes are made to your, in this case, probably less than perfect draft statement. But most things you can predict. Data breaches. If you, have a lot of PII, personally identifiable information, you can use, if you are a company that is dealing with that, you can probably predict that this is a potential, source of public information that you don't want out there and that you'll have to deal with. If you are a public company or you're raising funds, you could have to deal with things involving, finances. Even small companies, anything from, financial malfeasance to just, general run-of-the-mill equipment broke and now our shipments are delayed because our equipment broke. All things you definitely want to prepare for. And, we help with that and drill it and make sure that you are ready. So when it happens, hopefully it doesn't happen. Hopefully we put these on a shelf. We check it every 6 months and we put it back and none of these things ever have to be used. It's the fire extinguisher in the kitchen. It's there. You hope you never have to touch it. But you do check it every once in a while to make sure that it hasn't expired. That's where we are with these.
Okay, so I said last question, but this is my real last question. Do you believe is any PR, is bad PR good PR?
Most of the time you can try and spin it to be better.
That's a good answer. I like that answer.
Yeah. Totally. Well, dude, Joshua, this was awesome. This was enlightening. You dropped a lot of nuggets in here. It's very helpful. For somebody who did not understand what a chief communication officer was, yeah, I think you painted a clear, nice picture of how a communication officer could help an organization. So for our listeners that want to follow along, see what you're doing, possibly connect with you, where would you want to send them? Social media, website? Tell us.
Yeah. Check out our website, beltway.media, no.com. Also, you can find me on LinkedIn at, linkedin.com/my name, Joshua I. Altman. Also, just email me is actually probably one of the best ways to reach me.jaltman@beltway.media. Again, no.com, JAALTMAN.
Perfect. Well, I love it. In the day and age of AI and technology and all this, still email is that tried and true.
Yeah.
No reason to overcomplicate it with all this other stuff. And Joshua, we'll drop all that stuff in the show notes below, so people can access it. But dude, we appreciate you taking the time today and sharing with us, sharing with our audience.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Until next time, everybody. Peace.
Peace.
Thanks for listening and joining us on the Love Your Brand podcast. Stay tuned for the next episode, and remember, share the love.